Bonjour.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you for attending this 20-second session dedicated to big data, threats and opportunity. The GAFAM are there, the new masters of data. Do they have digital control? What about the storage of data? Should we talk about it? How can we ensure our European digital sovereignty? We're going to discuss this in the next hour and 20 minutes, and those are listening to us on the internet will be able to ask questions. We already get about 10 questions. We already have about 10 questions. So I really want to thank the speakers, the members of the panel. I'll do a brief roundtable discussion, and then Joelle Toledano from the Cercle des économistes will kick off the discussion. But first, before that, thank you, Linda Hahn. You're Vice President in charge of Public Affairs for Huawei and Director of the Paris platform of Huawei. Elie, GIRARD, you're CEO of Atos. Ludovic MOAN, you're founder and manager of Sigfox. Julien Groues, you're manager of Amazon Web Service in France. Eric MOULINES, good morning. You're a teacher at the Ecole Polytechnique. And on the other side of the Atlantic, Kaplan, professor at Stanford University, who actually recorded an interview. Unfortunately, cannot be with us live, if I could say so, but we'll be with him in a way. Joelle Toledano, you're associate member of the Cercle des économistes. You are economy professor, member of the Academy of Science, and you have the floor to kick off the discussion on big data. Thank you. Member of the Academy of Technologies. But for the rest, everything's perfect. So I'll try to introduce a wide, immense topic. So I'll take just a little facet, vision of the economist. We are here to discuss, to talk about economy and to show the two aspects of data, full of opportunities, certainly threats, and this is at the heart of public action dealing with data or data management. Of course, multiple usages, we've heard about that. It concerns a lot of domains, development of new product services or new analysis tools, optimization of production processes, extension of life management, or healthcare management, services to individuals or to persons, and then we talk about the participation to the advancement of science and technology. All domains should take advantage of it, assuming there is access to data and skills in IT. But it's not always the case because data is not an economic good as any others, and the market doesn't know how to optimize its usage. Today, several domains use data, scientists, of course, but many other domains, and we know trade, advertising. That's a topic we hear about almost every day. Now, production and shipping of data can be complex and costly, yet the market is rather opaque, blurry, and investment situations are somewhat misunderstood because of lack of investment or understanding. I'll try to focus on some of the debates, and I'll give you an economic perspective. First point, in fact, that of the issue of production and utilization of data. To produce data, make them utilizable, to maintain them, store them. I mean, that costs a lot of money. So we need to find a means to invite players to do so. Then data as one economic characteristic, which is specific, which is in jargon, is non-rival goods. That is, it does not wear out when we use it, because it would mean that it could be possible, it would be efficient for everybody to use it. But as I said a minute ago, we need more money is needed to produce data. We can see the contradiction, the first contradiction, which means that one of the first public policy is open data, open data is the fact that when public data exists, to leave them open and they can be valorized by anybody. But when they're not public, we cannot just tell the players, well, just give access to data, since to produce data costs money, and therefore there must be incentives to invest. On the other hand, when data does exist in some enterprises, you've seen that when they said it's gold, it's a new gold, it's a new oil, you know, they want to share the resource. So we need incentives to share data to make sure that several players could do data mining or share data, and they could be as utilizable as possible. This is one of what is at stake, that to have proper regulatory framework to organize this. Other contradiction, the problem of transparency. So many of you probably remember that at the beginning of e-trade, e-commerce, we are great. E-commerce will be a means for prices to drop. There will be no price difference between where you are located. Well, this did not happen. Did not happen the way we thought it would happen. And we fear personalized data, the fact that depending on your profile, you would have such or such price. And actually, some of us do still believe that this is what's happening when they buy a plane ticket. Well, in fact, reality is different. Shop owners don't do that because customers are not quite at ease with that. But what a recent study from the European Commission in 2017 shows is that the majority of shop owners follow the price of their computers online and adapt themselves. And therefore, there are significant price evolutions, which mean that there could be some, because of that, there should be sort of agreement, you know, behind the door agreement. You know, transparency, good for the consumers. Are you sure? Well, make sure that there would not be sort of a, you know, undue agreement between shop owners. And then we get to algorithm, which will install this, and then the problem of algorithm. We've heard about it recently. Again, it could be great for healthcare system, but it could also lead to unpleasant usages, or not as positive as we would like, with problem of bias, lack of reliability, lack of neutrality, and again we end up in this negative situation. Another topic we all know well, that of privacy. The regulatory framework should include the privacy, or the preservation of privacy, that is the control of collection and utilization of data, but also the storage of data to make sure that they would not be hacked through cyber attacks. So control of market which don't give enough control by consumers. Well, data collectors, you know, just have fun and collect too much data. And there is a true problem in terms of privacy. Now, those privacy issues are even more significant that market are concentrated. We've got several players. Well, data, in fact, is more scattered, distributed. But if you don't trust one, you can change your supply. But now, when it comes to privacy and data, you know, those are very concentrated data markets, where alternatives are limited. And once again, issue in terms of protection of privacy. Data storage in interconnected system means that, you know, you must have a controller to access data control with and also we be able to prevent cyber attacks. But we realize, or hacking, but we realize the fear of reputation that is will players invest enough not to be victim of cyber attacks. Is that sufficient to incite them to, or lead them to invest enough? And we see why there could be public action there. Now, I'll spare you, but it's a key topic, the issue of industrial data, automotive data, where again many topics arise, and we see why public action is necessary. Let me conclude simply by saying that if this amazing proliferation of data in the economy is a great opportunity to stimulate growth through innovation and efficiency or efficacy, let's not compromise other objectives. You need regulatory frameworks with good incentives. The world of data is and will be a key topic of public policies in the 21st century. Thank you very much, Joelle. And with no further ado, I'll give the floor to Linda Han for Huawei, who will start the roundtable discussion. I'm very pleased to be here with you, and I'm very happy to see that we have more and more women around the table. So I work for Huawei Technology. We provide connectivity equipment as well as smart terminals to operators, companies, and to consumers. And we've been in France for 17 years, well installed. Now we have 5 R&D and labs in France. So we've decided to start our Made in France product. So soon we'll open our 6th our fundamental research center and a production plant in France. And in Europe, we've decided to become the part of French tech and Earth tech. That's why we've developed a partnership with more than 300 French companies. So back to the topic. Now, is the technological development provide positive aspects? Of course. I know. I mean, just I'll give you an example. During the sanitary crisis, our technology, the big data and our AI technology can help in diagnostic making process. So this, as said, as the previous speaker said, it takes time to establish diagnostic, but with AI technology, we can speed up the diagnostic analysis, and we also 6 times shorter than in the previous method. Now, is this are there threats, or is it legitimate to be worried about the big data? The answer is also yes, because today we know we're entering we're shifting from industrial civilization to digital civilization. So it is a way creating value has changed, but the way to distribute value has not changed yet, and there is no regulation yet to define how value should be distributed according to or in compliance with this new area we're going through. So back to big data. Let's say that today there are a lot of worries about the data authentication or connectivity of data transaction, and of course we could talk about cyber security for data. From our experience, since we are equipment supplier, we supply infrastructures, even if in our viewpoint is that each player should define have its own contribution in its own domain. Even though we are a supplier, operators manage data, manage networks, but already we should integrate the fact that cybersecurity should be built in our equipment and solutions. This is why we've integrated cybersecurity in the design process, end-to-end. It's an end-to-end from design to R&D, from delivery of equipment and the supplies and the installation of such equipment. And of course, besides this, then after that, after we define a technical solution, we invite the third parties to do tests. Why do we do this? Because we think that with the various methods, it will help the entire ecosystem to design a work method together to ensure that cybersecurity. Okay, this is an example in France, for example. We work with Thales. We have that. We did test. We opened our R&D code. We actually opened our R&D code. They entered our R&D center. They checked the codes. They actually assimilated they simulated cyber attacks to see the reaction of our system and to see the imperviousness of our system. Then they issued a report to show the method, the process, their know-how, and the result of our solution. Of course, there's been no problem of cybersecurity, and they share this with and RNC in all the domains. So therefore, we show that we are fully transparent, or we show our know-how in order to create contribution in this domain. So with that, this is the kind of example. We've already had 223 certificates with third parties, with Thales, RC, and BSA in Germany, for example. So now, for each player to do its contribution in its domain. Well, is that enough? No, actually, no. In order to establish a regulation, you need the contribution of all players, including every equipment supplier, the operators, all the players such as Atos and all the, and all technological companies, including the French government and the regulators, in order to clearly develop a standard of regulation which would be fully transparent, open to all, and that every player will commit itself to respect. And we need efforts from all players in all domains to build together, to establish this standard and regulation or regulation to maximize the effect and minimize the risk. So we're ready to provide our contribution, and we're ready to share our know-how, and we want to do this with efforts on your side. All the other players, we're quite happy to build together a brighter and better future together. Thank you, Lydia. And Elie Girard, CEO of Atos. Now, before the roundtable, we discussed the issue of industrial data, physical data. Now, this is a point of worry for you. No, I'm not worried, actually. No, actually. It's a new way. Well, it's more in the opportunity category. First of all, I love the title of this session because usually it's big data, threats, and opportunities. So it is usually threat or opportunity, and this time it is and. So we're not being Manichaean. So and this is great. Madame Toledano showed it's both threat and opportunity, not or. So with each opportunity there are threats, and we have to understand them. Now back to industrial data or the so-called business or physical data, regardless the way you look at them. I think it is one of the major opportunity we have ahead of us for Europe, and especially for all over the world, but for Europe. And just come back, we talk about business data, corporate data versus consumer data, public data, or all the major platforms designed based on the individual or consumers' data or private data were U.S. platforms. They are U.S. platforms, or more. Most of them are U.S. platforms. So we spent years crying over crying out on the side of the Atlantic. Why don't we do it? We have great engineers and so on and so forth, which is true. But one of the many reasons, but one of the reasons of the exhaustivity of the reasons. But anyway, one of the reasons is that we thought that the European market, the mass market, were 450 million consumers, and which is quite a unified market where consumer data was unified, like standard. We have don't know many languages, cultures, and therefore a German, Italian, French consumer don't do this consume the same way. Food, drinks, whatever. And same with data, and therefore, whereas the American had sort of a captive market, well, almost a captive domestic market, huge domestic market straight away. And this, in terms of critical mass, critical size, that was one of the key driver. Then, of course, funding and so on and so forth. But corporate data or business data, what's is a great opportunity for Europe is that a company, German or French or Italian company, is a structure, regulation, behaviors, which are usefulness functions, which are very close. So we do have a market, unified market of corporate data or business data, which therefore I'm optimistic. I'll spare you details about the previous one. But I think that what is ahead of us, Ludovic will say it for me, I'm sure, So what is ahead of us, corporate data, which is open green field, you know, it's a green field. It's a great opportunity for Europe, for digital platforms. Joelle mentioned early on the European initiatives in this field, and clearly, and we back to threats and menaces, means that companies should accept and should have a legal framework to be able to share their data, that there should be a form of neutrality, which in the middle should ensure security and the administration of, in the British sense of the word, English sense of the word, sorry. And so just one second aspect or second opportunity, which I see.
And that opportunity will be important in that context. Big data will enable decarbonization, or the reduction at any rate of our carbon footprint. Data will make it possible to generate numerous applications for improving our energy consumption, and that is absolutely key for decarbonization. Of course, all companies have by now understood that they have to reduce their carbon footprint, and I think data is absolutely central to that end, to meet that target. Because, you know, quite often a lot is said about data centers being responsible for carbon emission and for energy demand. Yes, but 4% of CO2 emissions are linked to technologies. And it's increasing because technologies are developing. And those 4% make it possible to mitigate the emissions of the remaining 96% by 15 or 20%. So the figures vary, but it's roughly these proportions. Which is not to say that we shouldn't try and improve the carbon footprint of those new technologies. But what's most important is that leverage, the possibility for those 4% to help us mitigate the remaining 96%. Thank you very much. Ludovic Lemoine. Hello. Well, Elie has kind of stolen my thunder. No, we'll come back to it. I want to talk about physical data, because we talk so much of IoT these days. I think the challenge is not fully visible yet. In the 1990s, things were quite blurry, still vague. Now we talk about data privacy. You know, now on every Google page, you have to tick a box. Back then, you know, their slogan, their motto was, "Don't be evil." Physical data is the same. It's still emerging, but it is fundamental. I tend to compare physical data to oil. When we discovered that we could extract oil from out of the ground, and we started refining it, and oil companies could sell it at a higher price than it cost them to extract it. Well, it's the same with physical data. It's a sensor that is going to measure temperature. It is a GPS that is going to locate. So the challenge is to try and capture that data at as low a cost as possible so as to sell it at a higher price. And this is the economy that it can create. It's huge in terms of potential. So it's the collection cost compared to the intrinsic value of the data. And then there will be the possibility to cross-reference the data so as to double that effect. So I think the debate is not so much technological as economic. What kind of economy is going to emerge? We often talk of the tech, big tech, French tech. I think technology will be at the service of that industry. So we have to look at each company, each vertical, so as to help them determine what data will be relevant for them and help them do something that is very difficult, is to try to assess the value of the data. Maybe there would be a new job, a new line of work, which would be a certain type of data analyst. Let me take an example. Let's look at a connected bin or trash can. So there's a variety of costs involved, and so as to reduce the number of bin trucks, garbage trucks, and the number of routes. And so you have to try and determine how much it is going to cost to collect the data from that connected bin, and if it's worth our while to connect all bins or trash cans around the world. So it's everywhere around us. And it is going to make it possible to help companies to position themselves internationally. An SME or a very small company will be able to get an international footprint, which is why I try to alert political decision makers on that idea of value. And we have to stop obsessing about personal data because there is this uncharted territory where everything remains to be done. And there's huge potential. So if we shift our attention slightly to this uncharted territory, we can get a lot of players to emerge and help our small and medium-sized companies really gain from it. So thanks to technology, we'll cross the Atlantic, and we're going to listen to Jerry Kaplan, who kindly gave us an interview a few days ago.
I'm really sorry that I can't be there in person. Believe me, I would love to be in the south of France right now, rather than stuck here sheltering in place at home in the San Francisco area. I've been asked to address 3 basic questions in my brief opportunity to speak with you. So I'm going to repeat these questions and then try to give you short answers. First, the question is, are the GAFAM now too big in personal data gathering to be stopped? And GAFAM are Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. Should they be regulated? Should we expect them to expand further their power by gathering more data? And are they already targeting new sources of data? Well, I'd like to give you a little bit of comfort on this. In my view, here in Silicon Valley, there's a long history of tech companies that have dominated and ultimately faded, mostly went out of business. Now, when they were dominant, it was very hard to imagine that they would ever be supplanted, much less go out of business. And the same thing is likely to happen today. So in hardware, I remember companies like DEC, Sperry, Univex, CDC, ICL, Wang, Tandy, Commodore, Acorn, and IBM, which is only hanging on by its fingernails right now here in the US. PC software. I remember when Lotus Development, Ashton, Tate, and Microsoft were the only companies anybody talked about. Nobody could imagine any other companies taking over. In terms of search and internet, you had Yahoo, InfoSeek, Lycos, Excite, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, Netscape, Google. Social media, you probably don't remember these. America Online, Friendster, MySpace, Habbo Hotel, and now Facebook. Of course, Facebook is dominant, but it won't necessarily be that way. So all of the big companies in the GAFAM know this, and they are all running scared today. That's why they acquire anything that looks like it might be a threat. Now, today, data is king, but where that data comes from and what it may be used for can change in the future. And so these companies don't necessarily have a stranglehold on the data. And I'm not sure what might develop, but it may be very different than in areas that these companies can't really address. May I point out that the companies that are dominant in the US and Europe right now are not the ones that are dominant in China and really have no chance of becoming dominant in China. And many of the Chinese companies are in many ways larger and more entrenched. Okay, the second question I was asked to address is about facial recognition technology. And a lot of companies are withdrawing their products here in the US. And the question is they doing that out of an ethical principle, or are they just in fear of some kind of a backlash? You know, really, can we really expect this technology not to be implemented in the medium term? Well, here's what's going on. First of all, facial recognition technology has just gotten off to a bad start, and it needs a period of retrenchment. And the problem with facial recognition is basically it doesn't work very well. It's overhyped, it's easy to fool, and it's misused because its limitations are misunderstood. And the solutions to these problems is not to bury the technology, but to understand when to regulate it, how it can be used, and how to monitor its use for undesirable side effects, such as entrenching racial discrimination. Now, properly applied and regulated facial recognition has a lot of very valuable uses. And I believe we're going to ultimately get there. But it may take a decade or more for this to shake out as the current backlash has to subside and better ways of dealing with these problems are developed. Now, my third question that I was asked to look at is, besides all of these dark issues, what positive promises can we hope for from the big data technologies? Should we expect them to be more efficiency in the just existing things that they do, or is there going to be more disruptive innovation? Well, my answer is simple. Definitely more disruption. In the future, as in the past, we're going to develop new kinds of computing platforms that are going to be enabled by underlying technologies. What I've seen is that each time there's a fundamental advance in computing or communication technology, we see whole new markets emerge that supplant or eliminate the older ones. Now, examples of these going way back are things like the transistor, solid disk drives, flat screen displays, touch screens, Wi-Fi, internet, all of that. They've all created new kinds of technologies and created new markets that tended to supplant the old markets. Now, so what are the future technologies? You know, they may include all kinds of things like neural networking chips, quantum computing, other things that are currently on the horizon, virtual reality. Now, it's impossible to predict with any accuracy what sorts of future advances we will see, but they're surely coming. You know, we may have brain prosthetics that are going to help us to remember or help us to think. We may get devices that can really, in a very real way, seemingly real way, virtually transport us to distant places. So we can really like attend a conference like the one that you're at and feel like I'm there without actually physically being there. There's new brain imaging technology, which may be very important. And it may allow us to do things like to communicate with each other simply by thinking rather than by speaking or by typing or by writing or by tapping on our phones. So the same technology, this new brain imaging technology, it might revolutionize things like law enforcement. Imagine the world if we could accurately determine, correctly determine a person's guilt or innocence in the commission of a crime. That's a distinct possibility in the next 10 or 20 years. So in summary, I'd say this. The future is very bright. But as in the past, along with the great benefits are going to come new challenges. Now, those challenges may be legal challenges, ethical challenges, governmental challenges, regulation challenges, and social challenges. But that's nothing new. The next tech revolution is going to seem just like the last. It'll just be new technology, but it will have the same kinds of positive benefits and negative effects on society. And we've been able to deal with that in the past. I'm confident that we'll be able to deal with that in the future. Thanks very much.
Merci beaucoup, Jay Kaplan.
Thank you very much. Well, a bright future. I think it's the second time we've heard that phrase. Julien Grouès, Can we look forward to a bright future? Well, I certainly hope so. I think compared to some other topics that have been mentioned this morning around security and training, I think, Joelle, you mentioned it before, access to those technologies is very important. At Amazon Web Services, we've offered over the last 14 years cloud services that make it possible for our customers to use and pay per use. It makes it possible for our customers and our clients to build data lakes and to make use of those systems to generate value. I think the first subject that is important to tackle is to ensure the confidentiality of our customers' data so that they can work with real peace of mind and focus on generating value. We work a lot on physical data. Ludovic mentioned sensors to collect data. We have a partnership with Formula One, and Formula One car has 300 sensors, and that generates 1.1 million points per second. So the data needs to be analyzed and published for engineers in-house to improve those cars and also for other stakeholders to have all that information. So how can we have more secure services? Well, data are the propriety of our customers that we host in our data centers. We have to enable them to host the data where they please. We have currently 24 regions with data centers, one in Paris. So our customers who want their data to be hosted in France can do so, and they can also encrypt their data so that you can only access the data if you have the encryption key. And that can help fight cyber attacks, and they can also get their data back. So I think that's very important when we come to managing security so that big data does not become a threat. And another point that I wanted to come back to is training. To make sure that it is a bright future that we can look forward to, we need to train our young people and not so young people so that they can make decisions whilst being fully informed and knowing the challenges and what can be done with the data. So we have to look into how we can train and go on training them, and also get people back on the job market. And we've actually trained over 26,000 people in France to this technology so that it can be used as efficiently as possible. Thank you. Thank you very much. Last speaker, Mr. MOULINES. You are a lecturer at Polytechnique. A bright future? Well, yes, of course. It's hard to come last because a lot has already been said. There's a great variety in what has been said. When we talk of big data is everywhere. We talked of health data, physical data, IoT. We've talked of web data. So there have been three different eras in the data. Big data emerged around the mid-90s with the web, and then it developed with the emergence of social networks and with corporate data that pre-existed, but began to be included in big data as of 2000. And then these physical data flow, thanks to IoT, couldn't be predicted, could not even have been imagined. So there's so much at stake, even in and such challenges in terms of data storage. Are we going to store everything? Are we going to sort out what we want to store and what we need not store, what's relevant and not relevant, and that we could do without? indeed, it's uncharted territory, you know, for a researcher, and I'm delighted. I'm coming to the end of my career as a scientist, but I've gone through all the different periods in the emergence of the internet, and you know, I actually did my thesis at the end of the 1980s, and when I see what we understood of AI back then and what we understand of AI now, we can now do extraordinary things. And there's an anecdote, you know, I did voice recognition back then in Japanese in 1988 or 1989. Over a 25-year period, we're going to look at a small task, and we're going to use voice recognition, and we're going to use automatic translation to book hotel rooms. Automatic translation, well, now it's certainly a fact. So when it comes to technology, I'm an optimist. It is disruptive. In economy, in science, we haven't talked about that, but science is being transformed by big data because all those scientific tools have collected so much data that has brought so much knowledge. When we look at data collection and discovery of Higgs boson, that's big data. When we look at all the big scientific instruments, they are huge data collection tools. So I'm very optimistic on big data. But then there's a problem which is more of an economic nature, and I'm no expert in that field. We can feel the concern in Europe. We used to have Alcatel amongst the OEMs, but it's almost gone now, so we have no French big player. So I have no solution for that, but I can only make an observation. I took part in the European Google, you know, Quero, but that disappeared in a sort of bureaucratic quagmire. But what's at stake? The main challenge is how can we structure and cause a European champion to emerge in the digital and telecoms?
Well, you know, scientifically, in terms of opportunities, in many domains, data is something amazing. So I think you are clearly putting the question. I see on the screen the questions coming up from the listeners on the web. Now, how do we do it? Okay, we got a feeling that, and as to the question of personal data or private data, well, the battle is somewhat lost. You talk about the significance of physical data, industrial data. Now, how do we do it? You know, it's a huge investment needed. Do we have the means? Do we have the tools? Do we have the players? How do we promote them? And how do we shift from discourse and incantation to, for years we've said we need a European giant. I mean, how do we pull out of incantation verbs and go into act? How to walk the talk? I think, well, one of the answers, the physical data collection, yeah, you know, it has to be cheaper. Data collection has to be cheaper. And for Europe, I want the standard called 0G. We're not opposing the 5G, but it makes it possible collect like almost no energy for data collection. You know, because you want to collect in a room all sorts of energy, vibration, heat, you know, electromagnetic waves, whatever. So how can we make sure that with this energies around us, feed our sensors, which will transfer data to the cloud? And that can be manipulated and valorized. This is 0G, you know, to have global collection at a price shifting to zero. Even tomorrow, a bottle of a water bottle could be tracked from designed to garbage, almost for free. So this must think about specificity which is optimized, because every cent, every second cost, for industrial, and therefore there is a new standard. We have a network that goes towards this. We're not powerful enough to do it alone, but in France, with actors in the technology, we can define a standard and we can deploy it. We could be in this opportunity with an infrastructure we don't have elsewhere. For example, today, the problem we face that we depend on the infrastructure US or even Chinese tomorrow. So we have the opportunity with the investment scales which are available to us to create zero G together, deploy it together, and then we'll become leaders rather than followers. And and I'm looking for partners who would like to work on this, because it is a reality and it could be feasible. Zero G. Linda and Elie, I fully agree with Ludovic. This stake of data collection cost is essential indeed to expand it as much as possible, still with the difficulty to know what is the interesting or non-interesting data, that is valuable data and non-valuable data. So many elements. The second layer immediately after that is calculation. Then if there is one layer, one link of the chain, of the value chain that we can really act in Europe and especially in France, where we, because of our history, where we could have a competitive edge, is on calculation, computation, high density computation, which we have, and quantum computation, not just computation, just, quantum computation, quantum sensors, and so on and so forth. Quantum in general, it is clearly a domain we own, and the public authorities understood, and we are not we're not followers. We are good. We're leading. For the time being, we are good at timing. We're in a good timing. So we at Atos we've created the first simulators, quantum simulators. Quantum computer won't exist before a while. It takes a while. It'll take a while. Let's face it. But we've been able to do it with the former Bell computers, to talk about this story, which belong to Atos now, and we built a simulator. But we're putting several machines in series-mounted machines to simulate that we think that quantum behavior will be. But we're the first in the world to do so, and we sell it to US universities. So, or to US research labs. And I think this is, and it comes just after collection, because of course you need to structure data, and then you must be able to process them. Second element I want to mention is this. It deals with the issue of how do we create European champions. I think clearly we have to leave aside or behind us the bad ideas, which consisted in MOAN to create research, a French research engine, UMRG, whatever. We were all involved in that, directly or indirectly. It's not the point. Now, I think ex post, we could say it were not good ideas, but we have to create the framework, the conditions within which we'll be able to grow. And there is one theme, and if we have to, we can't talk about everything, but if there's one theme which is essential, is this the portability, data portability. Today, my dear friend on the left, with whom I work very well, when we develop an application in a cloud, in a cloud, well, you cannot change the cloud, but you have to do it again, all over again in the new cloud. So if we develop an application and it's at AWS, it's difficult to go back to go to Microsoft or to Google Cloud or whatever. So I'm talking, for the big, largest and far and large. So this portability of data portability, it's a rule. It's a rule that we have to impose. Should be imposed in Europe. It's not like we're not actually partitioning or it is a rule for independence. Companies, states, governments, administrations could no longer be dependent on. They could have the ownership and be able to port their data elsewhere with switching costs, which would be, remember the portability of the phone number 20 years ago, even longer than that. So it has changed. So we need a portability or data portability, application infrastructures portability. And this will give the possibility to, well, we have the data, but this is collection cost. You have the calculation, we'll have the quantum. If we have the portability, data portability, application infrastructure portability through the cloud, we'll have conditions to create digital platforms and therefore major players. But let's not try. Public authorities should not create major European champions themselves. It will not work. Linda, then Julien Gouet. Well, this has been a great explanation of the various layers, and I fully agree on this viewpoint. But let me add 2 points. Our answer, especially on how to create European champions, well, first and foremost, is to take all the advantages that exist in Europe. Europe is very strong to establish standards. We are in telecoms, with 2G, 3G, 4G. Europe has designed the standards, and everybody has to respect them. Europe established the recommendations that everybody can comply with, and Europe has developed the GDPR, and therefore we have to. So clearly, first, you need to create a standard and a regulation which will apply to everybody so that we could really deploy, more than what we have. Second aspect in our viewpoint is also we think that a European champion cannot develop the market only in Europe. This is our viewpoint. We will base it on the European market, but in order to try to integrate in some of our technical solutions, and sell this together all over the world. This is what is the creation of a true champion. This is what it is to create the true results to help European companies. Let me give you a concrete example. Quant is European champion. It's French, by the way, and they develop their in France very efficiently. They're Google competitors. They're competitors, but how can they grow even more? And now we included Quant in our system, Huawei. That is, we will sell together with the Huawei phone. We can develop this market together outside of France, and it is the same system as. For a French tech or high tech, it's always better to develop a solution and to use the advantages that already exist and to develop a solution together and sell in Europe and outside of Europe. This is how we do it, and this is how we're going to try to help creating true European champion. Portability. Well, if clients migrate massively into the cloud, it's simply because they can rapidly change suppliers if they so wish. I mean, there are many technologies in the cloud which are open source and which make it possible to migrate rapidly and to go to different technologies. And in fact, there are some segments, some regulations such that we have to install a reversibility plan, especially in banking system, to use certain technologies and to shift back to other or switch back to other technologies. And our work, we want to make sure that our customers wish to remain, because we provide safe, high performance, low cost, agile services. And if a client can find a better price elsewhere or a better service, well, he should be able to change then. But my job is to make sure that my customers are happy with our services and they don't want to go elsewhere. I think, Joelle, you want to react to this issue of industrial data, physical data. Yes, yes. Well, so I'm not there. So how can Europe exist in a beautiful world in industrial data? Well, the answer that emerges, well, don't lose attention to the rest, where the world has kind of shut down in terms of personal data. Well, let's open it up. It's a situation which it's not. The battle is not lost. No, of course not. I don't think. Well, let's not accept that indeed there are markets which are blocked now, frozen. We've been fortunate enough to have great services, to enjoy great services, which initially were free, but were not as free as we thought they were. So that's not the topic. In fact, we don't want to just accept a situation and not give ourselves the means to move on to the next step. So I think that there is also, we do have the means to get back on track and to take over again, to get our power back on part of our economy, which today is monopolized by external players. No matter how good they are, well, let's learn from them to do better, and I'm sure we can do it.
Ludovic, vous avez une réponse?
Ludovic, you wanted to respond. Well, I don't share Joelle's opinion on this, even though I wish it were the case. I regret that it isn't, but I think the money we would need to invest to get our form of legitimacy back, and when it comes to personal data, I call that digital deterrence, because same as nuclear deterrence, if you can become a leader in that field, you can harm people, even though the objective is not to harm people. Well, it's a balancing of powers. Well, I think the battle has been lost, and I think it's a good thing, for example, that with nuclear deterrence, several countries have that power. Well, those are strong words. I mean, it is complex. I quite agree that we shouldn't give up. As the digital emerged, it all happened so quickly that people were sort of a bit caught by surprise. And some of the people were not necessarily digitally aware, so they lagged a bit behind, and we've come to a situation that is almost unacceptable, because we don't want Facebook and Google to own the place, So it has created situations that are very conflict-prone. I mean, Facebook does fragment societies, and that also killed the written press. I think there's a political need to rebalance things. We got lost in a bureaucratic quagmire, and it is complex to help new champions emerge, because digital technology is not like a space shuttle. What we've succeeded in doing with Airbus and Ariane and high-speed train, CGV, we can't do the same with digital technology, because digital technology has changed and transformed itself. There was no cloud in the 80s or the 90s. So I agree that we shouldn't give up. I agree with Joelle when she says we shouldn't give up. But Google's strength is that they are able to get great people to emerge. Elon Musk, maybe we have to try and find the European Elon Musk or the French Elon Musk. That's very interesting. Just on this discussion about personal data and corporate data, I don't think we should pit them against one another. And I think that in terms of economic opportunity, jobs and so forth, corporate data, that's infinitely bigger in terms of market than personal data. And just one thing that is really interesting, I think, when you look at Google financial results, the driver is Google Cloud. That is enterprise cloud, no longer their search engine. So it's really interesting to look at the dynamics that is at play. So everything to do with businesses and corporate is now really booming. Well, I think we have to stop talking about Google as a search engine. That's a thing of the past. But having said that, it is business data and corporate data that we should talk about when we mention Google. That health data, maybe the automotive, fintech, and I don't think it's really a matter of I have a limited budget, where can I invest? No, all those great players did not win the day on the basis of merit. We missed out on that first wave. We failed to see or failed to understand. But to mention other players than Google or Facebook, I don't want the whole of commerce to be Amazon in France. Amazon is great, but if you don't set the right rules, and I don't think we want to be ruled by a private company. We are a democracy. Well, in Formula One, you know, when it's the same winning every time, you change the rules. Well, maybe we should change the rules so as to rebalance things, so as to have competition again. That's the role of regulation. Well, yes, I think it is being discussed, and it could really give us a new deal and a level playing field. And that 21st century world, we have barely started to understand it. At first, we were caught by surprise, and we were in awe. And it's that world that we're going to leave behind and that our children are going to inherit. Well, we can see that the position has changed with this new European Commission. What do you think of what Commissioner Thierry Breton has put forward? You know him very well. Elie Girard is giving that a pass. Okay. No, nobody has anything to say about that. Joelle, is it wishful thinking still? Well, it's still very early days in terms of discussion and proposals, so that's all very well. We need to go further. We need to bring together all stakeholders, so it shouldn't be a top-down approach, because there are stakeholders and technologies that should be at the service, that are at the service of all, and we can't change things to the detriment of one part of the population. So there are changes to be made and to be engineered, but it has to be done together with all stakeholders so that we can reach solutions. Yes, Elie Girard, well, you have something to say. Well, yes, but not without naming names and quoting anybody. We talked of the fact that we were caught by surprise, and 10 or 20 years ago, when those big tech firms came on the market, and I think on the European scale and in France, since we're in France, I think the what we now understand of challenges has nothing to do with what we understood 10 or 20 years ago. I talked of quantum computing. I think it's very important and very interesting to see what public authorities now understand. They're really ready to support that sector now. And there's a number of French players, not only Atos, that are following suit. And I'm not sure that could have been possible 15 years ago, and on a European level as well, without naming any firm or any country. They are earmarking budgets for this that did not exist 20 years ago. So we have lots of questions from our listeners. How can we guarantee sovereignty, European sovereignty, despite the American cloud out that doesn't respect it, and that leading US players have to abide by? Well, it is an acronym that is a misnomer because it is an American law that applies to all American players and not only cloud players. What we do at AWS is make it possible for our customers to have their data hosted in France, to own that data, to make sure the data is encrypted. So if there were to be a data leakage, the data would not be visible. And we abide by confidentiality rules and security rules for our customers because that's what our business model is built on. And you have to come back to what's the basis of the Cloud Act. It makes it possible for an American judge to call upon law and order if there is serious crime such as terrorism, money laundering, or human trafficking. This act, this law gives a mandate to a judge in those cases. There hasn't been any request from an American judge on any French-based company. And encrypted data, of course, is not accessible. We have to make sure that the encryption layer is not owned by an American player. No, I'm really being serious here. We have to make sure that, and it's the case, isn't it? That's what you're saying. Yes, you can benefit from Amazon Cloud or through one of your competitors. Let's say, I have a business and I benefit from Amazon Cloud, but there's an encryption layer on top that was developed by Atos or another firm. And if the Cloud Act is activated, so you don't have the encryption keys. So Amazon cannot enter its own cloud. And I think that's one of the solutions. The encryption layer needs to be owned by a non-American player. But that can be cracked, can't it, with quantum computing? Well, we are working on encryption, so it won't be deterrence anymore. It would be way beyond that. Another question. It seems pretty simple, but what are the comparative advantages of Europe in terms of data, and what are data-related projects that actually include several European countries? So what are the comparative advantages of Europe in terms of data, and what are the existing data-related projects that include several European countries? Loads of projects, thinking of scientific projects, there's loads of experimentations on a European scale about data. Comparative advantage, we generate a lot of data. One of the great successes in AI is DeepL. DeepL is an automatic translation system, so the basis for the data was generated in Europe through translation. So there's a lot we could talk about. There's a lot of European projects where we generate data. There's a lot of European initiatives that are interesting, but to assess the comparative advantage, well, computing is really a great advantage. In terms of physical data, I think Europe, in the production of physical data, production and capturing, Europe is one step ahead. And I think there are some really interesting things that are emerging in Europe so as to optimize the container flows, for example. So there are systems that that exist. So the Americans, you know, they look at the big picture, so they invest a lot of money. So it's the same as you know, what's invested in driverless cars and looking at what a car will look like in the future. So they do not have a refined approach. And what we're talking about here is a point of detail. It's about capturing data at a lower cost so that it can generate value with that data. It's not a matter of, you know, big tech. It is about capturing data at the lowest possible cost. So I think Europe can be a decisive player. And I think we should use some American selling techniques that have proven to be very efficient. So just a few seconds to Joelle. I think, despite the complexity of that topic, we've been able to cover pretty much all aspects and still leave this session with optimism. Well, that will be the catchword, optimism. Have a nice day and enjoy the following sessions.